Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here today, and I also want to thank the Bank Inter Foundation for hosting this event. I think in our globalized world, having this kind of international dialogue is extremely important. And I think in the context of promoting innovation, that creating this kind of international network to create and exchange information is exactly the best way to foster innovation. And I'm also glad it gives me a chance to be here today to talk about my obsession, which is energy, climate change, and energy efficiency. So I want to talk today about 5 topics, and I'm going to speak very quickly, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to just blip by some of my slides. I have too many slides, so please forgive me for doing that. But since I'm lowering the barrier between you and lunch, I hope you'll appreciate that. I want to talk about the weather, meaning climate. I want to talk about the concept of technology wedges for understanding how we can reduce carbon emissions. I want to talk about the role of efficiency in the economy as a macro economy issue. I want to talk about what we've done regarding efficiency in California. And finally, I want to talk about some global scenarios for how energy and the economy and equity could unfold in the future. So I want to start with first with the dramatic statement that I want to remind everyone that climate change is going to be the most important economic and public health challenge in the next century. It's very easy when people are talking about climate change and the politicians are talking about climate change to think about this as an abstract problem of chemicals in the atmosphere, but this is actually going to be a very important public health problem for all of us. And just to give you one data point, this shows the increasing intensity of hurricanes. This is data going back to 1970, and it's in 5-year increments. And the blue line is Category 1 storms, the green line is Category 2 and 3, and Category 4 and 5. The worst hurricanes is the orange line. And you can see that the Category 4 and 5 hurricanes are going to roughly double in frequency. Well, this is every 5-year period, 40 going up to about 90. And this data was published in 2005, a couple of weeks after the city of New Orleans was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, which really got everyone's attention in America. But this is the kind of phenomenon that we're going to increasingly face. Now, the Energy Commission sponsors a significant research program in understanding climate change and its impact on the California economy. This is one report that we've published, which I highlight for 2 reasons. One is that it's a very short report. It's written for the attention span of politicians, because we want to make sure that they understand how important this is going to be to our economy and to our population, but also because it's available in Spanish and it can be downloaded for your use as well. Now I want to talk next about technology wedges. This was an idea published in Science magazine a couple of years ago by 2 scientists at Princeton University who were wrestling with the idea of how to make it understandable to people what it means to reduce carbon emissions and what we have to do to stabilize the climate. Emissions have tripled since 1950, and they're bound to double again in the future, and that's what this graph shows. I'm sorry. This shows carbon emissions in billions of tons going forward 50 years. This shows from 2004 to 2054. And on the current trend, we're going to go from 7 billion tons per year to 14 billion tons per year. And we are already committed to serious climate change, as we've seen with things like the increase in hurricane intensity and the other things that are going to be occurring around the world. But if we can stabilize emissions over the next 50 years, we can avoid the most catastrophic risks of climate change. And then after 50 years, we actually would need to then reduce carbon emissions, which I think with technological change will be possible. But the first challenge is to stabilize emissions over the next 50 years. And so these authors, Sokolow and Pakala at Princeton University, came up with the idea of technology wedges. And each wedge is 1 billion tons of carbon per year in 50 years. And on that slide, it's 2054. And so here's a list of wedges that they came up with, again, with the idea that this is a way to help people understand what reducing carbon emissions means. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think it is important to get an idea of what these are. In terms of efficiency, it means doubling the fuel economy of all the cars in the world, or reducing vehicle miles traveled by 1/2, or using the best efficiency technology in all buildings, and I'm going to talk some more about that later. In terms of energy supply, it would mean tripling today's nuclear power plant capacity, or increasing wind energy 30 times, or solar PV 700 times, or applying carbon capture and sequestration at 800 coal plants. And again, I just want to get an idea of what these mean, because none of these are impossible. They are all doable with today's technology. There are no miracles in any of these wedges, unlike, say, the hydrogen economy, which takes several engineering miracles to achieve that vision. The other thing I want to emphasize is that most of these cost a lot of money, except for the energy efficiency measures, which actually pay for themselves, or things like halting deforestation, which just don't have a financial cost, but may have other costs to the economy. Now I want to talk about the good news about efficiency. And the first is that efficiency is very underappreciated, and that's one reason I think it's important to talk about it. Most industries have their own businesses and associations that talk about coal or petroleum or nuclear, but there really isn't an energy efficiency industry, and that's why it's one reason that government support for it is so important. Another reason is that there's huge potential for energy efficiency to reduce carbon emissions in the future. Now I want to show some data for the improvement in energy intensity in the American economy. This is showing energy per dollar of gross domestic product, going back to 1949 to today. And energy intensity has always naturally improved. If you look at data for different economies around the world, the technology improves, it's incorporated into our buildings and our vehicles, and so we would normally expect to see this kind of a drop. But because we're trying to understand the future, we wanted to understand more carefully how energy intensity is affecting our economy. And you can see here, we drew a red line through this period of 1949 to 1974, when of course there was a big change in energy markets. And during that period of time, the rate of improvement in energy intensity was about 0.4% per year. But after 1974, it's apparent that something happened. Of course, we had higher prices, which stimulated efficiency. We had structural changes to the economy, but we also had public policy. In the U.S., things like the corporate average fuel economy standards for vehicles. So the economy was getting more efficient faster. And the effect this had on the economy is really quite striking, and people I don't think appreciate it. The blue line shows energy consumption in the United States. The vertical axis is BTUs, and this is again just starting in 1949. So the blue line is history. The red line is what would have happened had the rate of efficiency improvement stayed at 0.4% per year. That is, we had the economic growth that we had, but we didn't get more efficient. And you'll see that what would have happened is that in reality, we added 25 quads of energy. A quad is 10 to the 15th BTUs, just a measure of energy. Had we not improved our efficiency, we would have used almost 175 quads, or 70 quads more. So one way to interpret this is that 3/4 of our energy supply since 1974 has come from energy efficiency. And this is really quite striking because all of this happened with nobody even noticing it. You know, we still have our cars, we still have comfortable homes and comfortable businesses. All of this happened and nobody noticed it, and nobody seemed to notice any financial impact. It also saved a tremendous amount of money for the economy. We would have spent $1.7 trillion. Instead, we spent about $1 trillion per year on energy in the United States. So right now we're saving $700 trillion a year, every year. and that's quite significant. Now, I thought it would be interesting to show some data for the United States and Spain. This is showing the same line we were looking at earlier, the rate of improvement in energy intensity in the United States. And you can see that the United States got about 55% more efficient since 1974. California got about 45% more efficient. And this is data I was able to find for Spain, which shows that Spain is staying at about the same level of efficiency. Now I want to talk about efficiency in California. This is a slide showing kilowatt hours per person, showing historical data going back to 1960 for the United States and California. This has become quite a famous graph in the United States. It's been on the front page of the New York Times newspaper. And what it shows is that both California and the United States were growing at about 4% per year up until 1974. And then the United States, the rate of increase slowed slightly to about 2% per year, but California became flat. And this is really, again, quite a remarkable difference in terms of the financial and pollution outcomes in California. What this shows is that today California uses about half as much electricity than we would have used had we kept going at that other growth rate. And since our utility bill is about $32 billion a year, it means that it would have been $16 billion per year higher. So we're saving a tremendous amount of money. And that's about $1,000 per year per family. And again, I was able to find some data for Spain, which shows that Spain is actually increasing kilowatt hours per person. Now I want to show some examples of how we did this in California. This shows the energy consumption of 3 typical appliances and what has happened over time. This graph on the horizontal axis starts in 1972, and all of these are normalized to 100. And what it's showing is decreases in consumption for first gas furnaces, which now today use 25% less natural gas than they did in 1972, central air conditioners, which use 50% less electricity, and refrigerators, which use an astonishing 75% less electricity than they did just about 30 years ago. And what it also is showing here, these white arrows are efficiency standards created by the state of California. And then the California standards became federal standards in the 1990s. And so these black arrows are showing federal standards. Now I want to look more closely at the data for air conditioning, because in California, being a hot place like Spain, air conditioning is very important. This is now showing kilowatt hours per year per home. And again, you see it decreasing. But the improvement going from 1970 to today is we're using 1/3 as much electricity for air conditioning, which is different than the preceding slide, if you recall, which said that we were using 50% less. And what this is showing is that we also have efficiency standards for new homes. And so this is the combined effect of putting an efficient air conditioner in an efficient building. And so again, we're getting quite dramatic reductions in energy consumption. But even that doesn't quite state how dramatic this is, because California homes have gotten almost twice as large over this time period. And so it's more like a 75% reduction in energy consumption for air conditioning. This is showing electricity consumption for refrigerators, again, over a very long time period, starting in 1947, going to roughly today. And the blue line is kilowatt hours per year for a refrigerator. And you can see it starts at about 400 kilowatt hours per year. It rises to an amazing 1,800 kilowatt hours per year in 1974, roughly. And then it makes a right turn and it comes down. And there's that combined effect of higher prices and, most importantly, I believe, California set efficiency standards for refrigerators. And you can see that there were a series of California standards which again became federal standards. And now, after more than 50 years of progress, we're back to where we were in 1947. But refrigerators have also gotten much larger. That's what this line is showing. Refrigerators in cubic feet have roughly doubled in size over that 50-year time period. And you can see it leveled out here. By the way, this leveling out, we attribute that to the size of the kitchen door, which sort of limits how big a refrigerator you can get in a house, fortunately. But you can see that refrigerators became more efficient without sacrificing service to people. And I want to just say one thing about the cumulative effect of the savings of refrigerators. It's one thing to look at one refrigerator and think that that's impressive, but this graph shows the megawatts of capacity that were saved with those standards. This shows that if all of the refrigerators today in the United States used the same amount of electricity that they used in 1974, they would have taken 50,000 megawatts of capacity. That's roughly the demand of California right now, is about 55,000 megawatts. Instead, because refrigerators are more efficient, they only use about 15,000 megawatts, or about 40,000 megawatts less. So this is a truly huge amount of energy. Well, I want to jump forward a bit and talk about California's goals for reducing carbon emissions. Governor Schwarzenegger adopted an executive order 2 years ago calling for these reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The one we're most focused on is the middle goal of getting back to 1990 levels by 2020, which is shown in this graph. You can see that California's absolute emissions have been increasing at about 2% per year, which if continued in the future would be that line. Instead, we're trying to get down to reduce our emissions about 1% per year. And there's a new legislation passed last year that requires us to do a lot of things in state government. This is a huge activity now. But one of the interesting things, and this gets back to how important international dialogue is to all of this, we're working very closely with other states in the United States who are very active in terms of climate change policy, which is a good thing because unfortunately the national government in the United States is not. And there's also been a lot of collaboration with European governments. Now I want to talk about some global scenarios. And this is a thought experiment that we got into because we're quite interested in this question of how can we solve our climate problems and also achieve what we would consider to be global equity for both energy services and economic growth. This graph shows CO2 per person on the vertical axis and CO2 per dollar of GDP based on purchase power equity on the horizontal axis for many of the Western countries. And I've highlighted the United States, California, and Spain. And it's an interesting picture. But what is also important is to think about what's going to happen going forward. And I want to again look at the historical data for the rates of improvement in energy intensity. And what I've done here is taken the annual change. This is the same data we were looking at earlier, but now the bars represent the annual change. And our hypothesis is that this seems to fall into three different periods. From 1981, which is this first bar, to 1986, was a period of time when OPEC was powerful, oil prices were high, gasoline prices were high. In the United States, the fuel economy requirements for cars were increasing, and the annual rate of improvement was 3.6% per year. From 1986 to 1996, roughly, the rate of improvement declined significantly to about 0.5% per year. And this is when OPEC was weak, oil prices were stable, the political environment did not support public policies to promote efficiency. But then after 1996, there's another apparent change. And this is one that I think is quite interesting because I think it reflects changes in productivity in the economy created by the internet and all the wireless kinds of technologies that we were talking about earlier. And it's going to be interesting to see if the trends in the late 90s continue. You can see that 9/11 and the dot-com bust seems to have slowed some of that rate of improvement. But nonetheless, in this period of time, the rate of improvement in the American economy was 2.4% per year, which is quite significant. Here's the data for Western Europe. The magnitude of the changes are not as large as the United States, but you do see this same pattern. It's larger in the 80s. The rate of improvement declines in the 90s, and it picks up again in the latter period. And then this shows the same data for California, and here the magnitudes are greater. In the 80s, California, being a more efficiency-oriented government and economy, perhaps, achieved rates of improvement of 4.1% per year. But we also slacked off in the 90s, 0.8% per year, and then in the latter period achieved a rate of improvement of 2.5% per year. Now I want you to keep those numbers in mind for a few minutes. This is now going back to the global data, looking at a much larger sample of countries. And I think this is quite an interesting picture. The vertical axis is CO2 per person, and the horizontal axis is GDP per person, again adjusted for purchase power parity. And the color code here is, the colors signify regions. So the green up here is OECD, and the blue down here is Africa. The green in here is roughly Latin America, and the orange is Eastern Europe, just to give you an idea. Now, the size of the dots are population. So this big dot is the United States. I think if my eyes are good, I believe that is Spain. These two big dots are notable, of course, because this is India and China. So you see there's quite a big range. Now what we want to do to solve climate problems and equity problems for the global population is we want to reduce CO2 per person, and we want to increase GDP per person. So in this picture we want to basically move to this corner. So the OECD countries need to become more efficient. The African countries and other countries need to improve their economies, and hopefully not in a way that increases their carbon emissions. So now I want to put all of that into this picture, which shows, this is today, this is 2005, and these bars represent different scenarios for the future. And today we have roughly 6.5 billion people who use about 2 kilowatts per person average, or about 13 terawatts of energy. And we have a gross world product of about $44 trillion, which implies that an average personal income globally of about $6,800 per year. And of course, there's a huge range around that. Now, the interesting thing is what could happen in the future. In the future, we're going to have roughly 9 billion people. We would like them to have, say, Western European standards of energy services, or about 4 kilowatts per person. We would like them to have Western European incomes of about $2,600 per person. Now that implies if we have an income, gross world product of about $234 trillion per year in 50 years. And we can do that if we have an economic growth rate of about 3.4% per year, which is ambitious but doable. And if the rate of improvement in energy intensity globally is about 1.3% per year. And we saw from that historical data that that's roughly achievable. But now I think the interesting question is that if we do that, we're going to use 3 times more energy in the 50 years than we do today, which is quite a challenge. It's making our climate change problem much, much worse, going back to the stabilization wedges. We're trying to become more efficient and reduce the amount of money we have to spend on nuclear energy and coal, carbon capture and sequestration. So if we can work harder to promote efficiency, and say we could achieve a 2% per year rate of improvement, or 3% or 4%, as you can see, it dramatically reduces the amount of energy used in the world. And on one hand, this is just a very simple arithmetic game of taking small changes in an annual growth rate over many years. You get big changes in the outcome. But here I think it tells a very interesting story, because it really wouldn't take very hard, based on the California experience, for the world to achieve these much higher rates of improvement in energy intensity. I mean, California has done 4% per year, and we didn't notice any change in our lifestyles. It was just easy and unconscious. The problem is that, you know, many states in the United States and other countries aren't conscious of energy consumption. And what this seems to call for is more attention by governments and industry on the kind of innovation and public policies it takes to achieve these reductions in future energy consumption, which will be really essential for maintaining our climate as much as possible like today, and avoiding the kinds of consequences we will have in the future. So thank you very much.